I never thought that I would share this story, but now I'm 30 years old and I'm finally ready to tell it. Because probably, after so many years, I want at least for myself to put all the dots on the and perhaps to understand why then everything happened the way it did, and not otherwise. My name is Samantha, and this is how my life has changed forever. When I was 13, our family seemed to be the most ordinary. Mom, Dad, and I lived in a small but cozy house on Maple Street, where in summer the porch smelled of freshly mown grass, and in winter the windows steamed up from hot chocolate, which I liked to drink wrapped in a blanket while my parents argued about the one who's going to light the fireplace today. Dad worked at a construction site, coming home tired every night, but with that good-natured smile that made him the most beloved person in the world. And Mom, a part-time accountant, was calculating all the time, even when she was cooking dinner. But she always found a moment to pat my head or fix a stray lock of hair. We weren't rich, but we were happy, and it seemed to me that it would always be like this. Because at the age of 13, you don't think about how fragile your world can be. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country and from which city you are watching this video. We are very interested to know from which corner of the planet our video is being watched. Enjoy watching! Everything fell apart one morning when Dad, as usual, got ready for work, kissed me on the top of my head, said he would definitely watch the movie I had chosen with me in the evening, and walked out the door, not knowing that this was the last time he would cross the threshold of our house. An accident. That's what the people who brought the news said, but it seemed to me that time itself had simply stopped, refusing to move on, because it was impossible for someone to be here, smile at you, and a moment later, disappear forever. Mom fell apart completely, irrevocably, as if a part of her soul had gone with Dad, and nothing else could fill that void. She sat in an armchair for hours, staring at one point, not hearing my words, phone calls, or even her own breathing. I quickly realized that now I would have to take care of myself, cooking, washing clothes, doing homework without reminders, making the bed. But most of all, I missed not even my mother's care, but her voice, the softness in her words that used to envelop me like a warm blanket. "Samantha, dear," she said to me one evening, 6 months after Dad's death, when I had already given up hoping that she would ever speak to me again in more than one syllable. She was sitting at our kitchen table, fiddling with a cup of coffee, as she always did when she was nervous, and I realized that she was about to say something important. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I met a man. His name is Robert, and he makes me happy again." I should have seen this coming. Late-night calls, which she tried to keep in a whisper, but I could still hear her voice changing, becoming softer, more animated. She began to worry about her appearance again, lingering longer in front of the mirror, choosing a dress not to go to the grocery store, but for something else. Mysterious errands that caused her to leave the house, leaving me alone with dinner prepared in a hurry. It all added up to the big picture, but I didn't want to see it until my mom told me to my face, "Robert is moving in with his 6-year-old daughter, Sarah." It felt like a punch in the gut. "But Mom," I protested, trying to find at least some words that would explain to her why this was wrong, why it hurt me, why Dad hadn't yet managed to disappear from our house enough to let someone else in. "I know, honey," she interrupted me, and there was no gentleness or sympathy in her voice, just a stern, cold tone that I had begun to hear more and more often in recent months. But life goes on. Robert is a good man, and Sarah needs a mother. We can be a family again. Family. That's what she called it. Robert moved in 2 weeks later, bringing with him boxes of things, books that smelled like someone else's house, and a girl who admired our flowered wallpaper as if it were painted in gold. Sarah was small, too fragile, with thin blonde pigtails and huge blue eyes, and my mother looked at her with such tenderness, with which she had not looked at me for a long time. "Look at her," she said, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me. "Isn't she lovely? She needs so much love and attention at this age." Yes, she needed attention, and my mom was more than happy to give it all to the last drop, which seemed to have no more left for me. I watched her transform into the perfect stepmother for Sarah while I became invisible. But I finally realized how it was going to be during dinner, a week after they moved in, when Robert's mother came to visit us, a woman who has been the bane of my existence since that evening. She looked at me carefully, looked me up and down, and bowing her head said, "Oh, what a big girl you are," and then reached out and pinched my cheeks so hard that I wanted to scream. "Such a beautiful face," she said, digging her fingers into my skin like claws, and I felt something shrink inside me, as if the world had taken a step aside again, leaving me aside. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that when she looked at me point blank, she said something completely different. "You know, Robert, this house would be perfect." She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't have to. I saw the way she looked at me, as if I were a blot on her son's perfect new family portrait. I found bruises on my cheeks where Mrs. Henderson had pinched me, and I stared at them in the mirror for a long time, touching them with my fingertips, as if I couldn't believe they were real, that her bony hands had left such obvious marks on my skin. But when I tried to show them to my mom, hoping that she would at least, if she frowned or felt sorry for me, she just shook her head, waved me off with tired annoyance, and said that I was exaggerating, that I should be more tolerant, because Mrs. Henderson is just an elderly woman who finds it difficult to get used to a new family, and I, as the eldest, should show understanding. But I knew that this was not true. I knew that understanding should be mutual and not required only from me. Life became a routine, but not the one I was a part of, because every day it became clearer to me that the house that had once been mine now belonged to someone else, that Mom, Robert, and Sarah had become this perfect little unit that did everything together. On weekends, they went to the park, went boating, laughed while feeding pigeons, then returned home and had popcorn movie screenings, snuggled on the couch under one blanket, and then had dinner at the dining table, chatting animatedly and laughing at Sarah's silly jokes. But they never, ever invited me with them. They never offered to join because for them I was something superfluous, something that did not fit into their new, carefully constructed family portrait. Meanwhile, I was increasingly sent to my mother's friend Janet, and if at first it happened from time to time, then it became so familiar that I was no longer surprised when my mother said again, "Samantha, honey, Janet needs help with little Emily, do you mind?" But her voice wasn't questioning. It no longer had the warmth it used to have. It was distant, as if she was just telling me another fact, and I knew what that meant. I needed to get lost. I was walking to Janet's place, where at least someone was happy to see me, where 4-year-old Emily, with her bouncy brown curls and gap-toothed smile that lit up any room, ran up to me, loudly shouting, "Ari, Ari!" That's what she called me, not knowing how to pronounce my name completely, and hugged me around the waist, not stopping chatting about what we were going to do today. We built fortresses out of blankets, had tea parties with her plush toys, played out scenes from fairy tales where I made all the silly voices, making her squeal with delight. And in those moments it seemed to me that I existed again, that someone needed me, that I was seen. And even when I was just sitting on the floor watching Emily fiddle with her dolls, Janet brought us snacks, sat next to us, asked about school, and most importantly, listened to my answers, really listened, without nodding absently, without waving away, without changing the subject, and I felt warm because I understood. That's probably how a family should feel, but it was different at home. Mrs. Henderson, Robert's mother, seemed to have decided that our house was her property, that she had every right to rearrange the furniture, criticizing every detail, complaining that the curtains were too dark, the wallpaper too dull, and the atmosphere needed refreshing. And Mom just nodded obediently, agreeing with her every word, changing our living room, kitchen, corridors, as if in this way it was possible to erase the past and replace it with something new, more suitable for their ideal family. "These walls should be the color of eggshells, not cream," Mrs. Henderson declared, and the next day Mom was already standing in the hardware store choosing paint samples. "The furniture needs to be rearranged for more comfort," she instructed, and Mom spent all weekend lugging heavy cabinets and armchairs, while Mrs. Henderson gave instructions with her arms folded. But her favorite thing to do was to torture me. She grabbed my cheeks with her bony fingers, squeezing so hard that it felt like my skin was about to burst, and said, "You're still not holding your fork properly, I see," pinching even harder. "Such bad table manners, your mother should have taught you better," she added venomously, and I clenched my teeth, swallowing a lump in my throat. She would come into the living room, see me reading on the couch, and cluck her tongue. "Look at her slouching. No wonder she has such terrible posture." And again her fingers dug into my skin, and I just tried to slip away. Robert was the same, but in his own way. If I accidentally knocked over a glass or dropped a plate, he would immediately explode. "Do you even understand how much it cost?" His face would turn red, and his voice would become harsh, scalding. "Of course not. You've never earned $1 in your life. You're just a freeloader, living off my hard work." I apologized, picked up the pieces, wiped the puddle, but it wasn't enough. "Sorry, it doesn't replace things," he continued. "You eat my food, wear the clothes I pay for, live in my house, and what? You don't do anything. You just break things and make a mess." Every time this happened, I looked for my mom, hoping that she would intervene, that she would say something. But she just kept cleaning or fussing with Sarah, pretending that she didn't hear, that she didn't notice that I exist at all. I couldn't forget the look on her face when she shoved the phone into my hands, as if it wasn't something I'd earned with my own labor, but something dirty and disgusting that she hated holding. Her lips were pressed tightly together, her cheeks were flushed, and when she finally looked at me, her eyes were glittering with such anger that it took my breath away. "I hope you're happy now," she said, and I wanted to laugh, but not from joy, but from the absurdity of what was happening. Because did she really think that was what I wanted? That it was nice for me to go to Mrs. Collins, tell her how I live in my own house, how Robert's every word burns me from the inside, how my mother turns away, pretending that nothing is happening. Didn't she realize that I wasn't a traitor, but just a kid who was trying to protect himself in some way because no one else was doing it? I clutched the phone in my hands, but the joy of having it back had already evaporated. That evening, Sarah cried long and loudly because her phone, which had never been hers, was taken away from her, but no one wanted to notice. Robert walked around the house, irritably throwing Mom's things on the couch, rattling dishes, and occasionally throwing glances in my direction, which made me feel cold. But Mom was silent. When she entered my room, the door slammed shut behind her with such a thud that my shoulders involuntarily tightened. "How dare you?" Her voice was low, rising to a whisper, but there was more fury in it than in a scream. "How dare you do this behind our backs?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. "Do you know how awkward that was?" She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume mixed with something bitter, like she'd just smoked, even though I'd never seen her with a cigarette before. "Do you know what I had to hear from the principal? From your teacher? How could you humiliate me like that?" I couldn't believe my ears. "But Mom—" "No." She abruptly raised her hand as if cutting off my words. Don't you dare talk. You're just a traitor." That was the last thing she said before she turned around and walked out, leaving me standing in the dark, clutching my phone to my chest, which no longer seemed so important to me. After that, everything changed. Not for the better. No, I didn't get more attention or care. I didn't feel that Mom suddenly understood me and realized how terrible she was. No, it just got worse. Robert wasn't even trying to hold back now. If before he had at least waited for the moment when Mom wasn't looking, or pretended that his screams were just a manifestation of righteous anger, now he openly showed how much I irritated him. "Ah, here comes our little sneak," he would say when I entered the room, and Sarah would immediately pick up on him. "Tattletale, tattletale." Mom didn't say anything. Mrs. Henderson just shook her head and clicked her tongue, as if amazed that such a worthless girl could have appeared in her ideal family. I had to work even harder because now I knew. I don't have a safety margin. I don't have a home where I can relax, where I can just be myself. I continued to walk the dogs. I continued to sit with Emily. I continued to help Mr. Cooper, and I saved every dollar I earned. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't spend money on food at school. I didn't go to the cinema with my classmates. I've been saving up. I didn't know what it was for at the time, but somewhere deep inside me there was a feeling that this money was my ticket to freedom, that one day I would be able to leave and never come back. But for now, I could only wait. I could feel my blood pounding in my temples, my heart pounding in my chest, drowning out all the sounds around me. But even through this deafening hum, I could hear my mother breathing heavily and raggedly, the floor creaking under her feet, Robert pushing back his chair, returning to eating, as if nothing had happened, as if just she didn't raise a hand to me, as if she hadn't just destroyed the last remnants of what bound us. She said, "Get out," and I knew she really meant it. I didn't cry. I didn't shout back. I just turned away, feeling a hot, throbbing pain spreading down my cheek, and slowly walked towards the stairs, not understanding the road in front of me, not realizing exactly where I was going. I could hear Sarah asking something. I could hear Robert answering listlessly. I could hear the clink of silverware on plates. Everything went on as if a turning point hadn't just happened, as if no one had noticed that I had completely ceased to be a part of their family. I went into my room, closed the door, leaned my forehead against it, and took a deep breath, trying to somehow cope with what had just happened. I wasn't going to leave right now, but I knew I would do it. I went to the closet, pulled out my backpack, unzipped it, and started throwing everything I needed inside. A few t-shirts, a pair of jeans, a hoodie, and underwear. Then I reached for the top shelf, where my savings were neatly wrapped in a sock. Every coin, every dollar that I had saved for years, I folded into a small envelope and put it in a secret pocket of my backpack. My phone number, my school documents. I knew I couldn't take everything with me. Most of my things would stay here. Books, old diaries, the teddy bear I used to sleep with when I was a kid. But none of that mattered anymore. I didn't look back. I could hear Sarah laughing downstairs. I could hear Robert saying something. I could hear a car passing by the window. But all these sounds seemed distant, muffled, as if I was no longer a part of this house, as if everything that was happening here had nothing to do with me anymore. I sat down on the bed, clutching my backpack to my chest, and felt a lump stick in my throat. I didn't cry. I won't let myself cry. I was just waiting. 3 days have passed. I knew that if I left in the middle of the night, no one would notice, at least not right away. I waited until everyone was asleep, until the house was plunged into darkness, until the silence became so thick that it seemed you could touch it with your hands. I put on my sneakers, put on a hoodie, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and holding my breath, opened the door to my room. The floor creaked. I froze, but no one woke up. I walked down the hall, down the stairs, past the living room, which still had Robert's boxes, past the kitchen, where the dirty dishes from dinner were on the table. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay here any longer. When I closed the door behind me, a strange, lingering feeling spread in my chest, similar to fear, but at the same time, I felt relief. I'm not coming back. I stood on the porch of Jenny's house, clutching the straps of my backpack so tightly that my knuckles turned white, trying to stop my hands, legs, and whole body from shaking, trying to convince myself that I had at least a grain of confidence in what I was doing, when in fact I was bursting with fear. Jenny was the only person I could call that night, the only one who wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't look at me with pity or incomprehension, wouldn't try to persuade me to come home. When the door finally opened and I saw her sleepy, worried face, I saw how she ran her gaze over my figure, noticed swollen eyes from tears, wet tracks on her cheeks, a backpack that spoke for me better than any words. She did not ask anything. She just stepped forward, grabbed my hand, and pulled me inside, hugging me tightly, and I felt something inside me finally break, because for the first time in many years, someone just held me like this, without judgment, without malice, without reproaches. I was sitting in her kitchen, wrapped up in the sweater she gave me, feeling the hot tea warm my palms. But the cold inside wouldn't go away, and the only thing I could think about was how to live now, how to cope with college, when I'm basically homeless, when I don't have no one to come to on a difficult day, when I have nothing to say if someone asks where I live, When her Aunt Maria came into the kitchen, tall, with piercing eyes and a slight accent that immediately made it clear that she was not born in this city, I straightened up, trying to look collected. But she already knew, already understood who I was, because Jenny had told her about me. "So you're that girl," Maria said, looking me up and down, and there wasn't a drop of condemnation in her voice, just a statement of fact. "Do you need a job?" It turned out that she owns a small Italian restaurant in the city center, that she has an empty studio apartment right above it, and before I could realize what was happening, she was already offering me housing, free meals for half the rent, and a flexible work schedule that wouldn't interfere with my studies. "The room needs a little renovation, but it's clean and safe," she said, shrugging her shoulders, as if it wasn't something incredible, as if it wasn't the lifeline I was afraid to even dream of getting. I started working as a waitress, grasping everything on the fly, studying every detail, delving into the intricacies of the business, realizing that here, in this restaurant, in this small apartment, for the first time in a long time, I can feel safe. Maria turned out to be tough, but fair. She taught me not only how to set tables properly or communicate with customers, but also that details are important in this business, that every order, every review, every slightest remark must be taken into account. "Look," she said, nodding at the table in the corner where the customers were sending the food back for the third time. "That's why we document every complaint and every compliment. You can't run a business if you don't know what's working and what's not." The apartment above the restaurant was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a mini fridge, but it was mine, and that was enough. Robert didn't shout about freeloaders here. Sarah didn't barge in without knocking. Mrs. Henderson didn't criticize me for my posture or manners. It was my space where I could study, sleep, think, just breathe. By the last year of my studies, Maria promoted me to an administrator, and when I graduated in business on Saturday, I returned to the restaurant on Monday. But now I was engaged in schedules, inventory, and personnel management. "You have a gift for this," Maria told me 2 years later, when I had already reached the position of manager, and I felt a strange, warm feeling spreading in my chest. One day, she invited me into her office and looked at me the way one looks at a person with whom they are going to discuss something really important. "Jenny says that you talked to her about a partnership," she said, and I shifted nervously in my chair because we had indeed discussed it. But so far, we had not made any serious steps. "We thought about it, but—" "Okay," Maria interrupted, leaning back in her chair, "because I'm retiring." I froze. "The restaurant goes to Jenny," she continued, pausing as if to give me time to process the meaning of her words. "But she wants it to be run by someone who knows the business from the inside. Someone like you." My heart almost stopped. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that you should manage this place together, equal partners. You have the experience. She has the passion. It can be a powerful combination." Jenny and I stayed up all night discussing it, developing a plan, weighing the pros and cons. But the more we talked, the more clearly I realized that we could really do this, that we had a chance to turn Maria's restaurant into something unique, something that would belong to us. I've invested all my savings, every penny I've been able to save over the past few years, and Jenny had so many ideas to modernize the menu and expand the business that I thought her enthusiasm could set the whole city on fire. "We can do this," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Really do it, Samantha. Make it ours." And we did. We changed the interior, added new dishes, and made the restaurant not just a place to eat, but a place where people came for the atmosphere, the comfort, and the story. Years later, we opened a second establishment, and then a third. Sometimes, walking through our restaurants, watching how everything was going smoothly, I thought about my family. It's been 11 years since the night my mom slapped me and kicked me out. I knew that they still lived in the same city. Sometimes I accidentally stumbled across their profiles on social networks, caught a glimpse of photos in which Mom and Robert looked as if nothing had changed, as if I had never existed. But now we lived in different worlds. I stood in a daze, feeling the blood trickle down my cheek, throbbing with hot resentment. And Robert was still standing in front of me, drunk and smug, grinning as if he had just shown everyone something incredibly funny, as if the broken plate at my feet and the stinging wound on his face were part of some harmless prank worthy of appreciative laughter. My mother. The one who once taught me how to tie my shoelaces, the one who, as a child, gently straightened my hair before going to bed, sat at the table and did not even move, did not make a single movement, did not utter a word. Her face remained cold, indifferent, but in her eyes I saw something. On the other hand, there was a spark of malice, satisfaction, as if she was enjoying this moment, as if every piece of glass lying at my feet was proof of her own rightness. "So, what's up, Samantha?" "What is it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you going to clean up, or is your pride not allowing it?" Sarah giggled, burrowing into her fiancé's shoulder, and I felt a wave of anger rise inside me, so pure, bright, and overwhelming that it made my head spin. I was going to answer. I was going to tell them everything. That I worked day and night, that I studied when they didn't even think about me, that I built my life from scratch, alone, without their help, without their support, that I'm not just a waitress but a co-owner of this restaurant, that I'm that girl, whose name is on the sign outside, the one who now runs what they can only afford to despise. But before I could open my mouth, before I could spill out everything that had been accumulating in me for these 11 long years, I heard Jenny's clear, confident voice cut through the silence, making everyone freeze. "I think this situation requires immediate attention," she said in a flat, emotionless tone that was steely. She stepped forward, and in her hands I saw a thick folder made of dark leather with gold lettering. Our service agreement, the same document that she and I had been developing for years, clarifying the rules point by point, making sure that every client, every employee, every aspect of the business was protected. "According to Section 3.2 of our service agreement," Jenny continued, opening the folder and leisurely scanning the pages, "any clients who verbally abuse or physically harm our staff, or the owner—" She paused, emphasizing the last word and giving me a quick, encouraging glance, "will immediately removed from the premises." The deathly silence that hung in the hall after her words seemed almost tangible. I saw my mother's expression slowly change. First a slight bewilderment, then realization, and then anger, dull, burning, but no longer triumphant, but confused. Robert blinked and frowned, as if he didn't fully understand what was being said. "What nonsense is that?" he grumbled, shaking his head. "She's just a waitress, no one." "She's a co-owner," Jenny said clearly, and there was no hint of doubt in her voice. Robert recoiled, his face contorted in disbelief. He cast a quick glance at his mother, but she could not hide the shock that flashed in her eyes. "What?" she finally managed, but her voice didn't sound as confident as before. "This place belongs to Samantha as well as to me." Jenny easily turned the page of the agreement, tapped the line she was looking at with her finger. "And according to our rules, you must leave the establishment immediately." The hum of voices in the hall intensified. People began to whisper. Someone rose from his seat, looking around, and the waiters froze in anticipation, not knowing how to react. I looked at Jenny, and my heart squeezed with gratitude. She stood next to me, firmly, unshakably, keeping her head high, and at that moment I realized that I was no longer alone. Mom, Robert, Sarah, they no longer had power over me. I was no longer the kind of girl who could be bullied, humiliated, and kicked out the door. Mom got up from her seat slowly, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Samantha," she said, and for the first time all evening, there was emotion in her voice. But I wasn't going to listen anymore. "You have 2 minutes to leave the restaurant," Jenny said evenly, and then turned to the nearest waiter. "Call the guards." Mom jerked, Robert turned purple, and Sarah couldn't seem to decide whether to be angry or scared. But I didn't care. I stood there, my back straight, my shoulders straight, and for the first time in 11 years, I felt like I wasn't afraid anymore. I watched my mother's face slowly lose its color, as for the first time in my life she really looked around, really looked at the restaurant I had created, at the elegant interiors, at the exquisite clientele, at the reviews of grateful visitors shining in frames on the walls, at everything I had built without her, the kind of success she'd never even bothered to find out about. "That's impossible," Robert muttered. But I saw doubt appear in his eyes as he was no longer so confident in himself, as his posture changed slightly, as if reality suddenly turned out to be harder than he could bear. "In addition," Jenny continued, her voice was steady, confident. She did not give them a second to recover, nor a chance for another insult. "In case of an attack on the staff or the owner, we reserve the right to immediately stop the service without a refund." She turned to me, and there was a question in her eyes, but I already knew what to do. I wiped the blood off my cheek with my sleeve, straightened my jacket, looked around the room, and finally found the voice I had been holding back for so long. "Clear the tables," I calmly but firmly ordered the staff. "All 50 guests must leave the premises immediately." The waiters got down to business without further ado, deftly removing plates and glasses, and that's when I heard that familiar screech, the one that had haunted me since childhood, the screech that reproached me for my posture, for manners, for food, for my every move. Mrs. Henderson, Robert's mother, clutched her plate of pasta as if it were a family legacy, shouting protests and stamping her feet, her voice ringing in the hall, clinging to the walls, plaintive and angry at the same time. "You can't do this," she squealed, clutching the plate to her like a jewel. "This is the engagement of my son's daughter." One of the waiters, Miguel, tried to gently take the plate from her, but she yanked it back with such force that the sauce flew apart, and then, opening her mouth wide, screamed, "Help me! They're attacking! They're attacking me!" Robert immediately lurched forward, his face contorted with rage, his hands clenched into fists. He gave me a look full of hatred and took a step towards me. "Get your hands off my mother! Stop it!" he barked, heading straight for me. But our security team was faster. 2 guards quickly stepped between us, and the third was already talking on the radio, informing us that the police were on their way. Sarah burst into tears, sobbing as if her world had collapsed, her perfectly planned engagement party turning into a disaster in front of everyone. "Mom, do something," she howled. But Mom just stood there, staring in front of her with unseeing eyes, and mascara was running down her cheeks, turning her face into a mask of despair. The woman who once hit me and kicked me out of the house couldn't even meet my eyes anymore. The next 30 minutes passed in chaos. First, the police arrived. They started taking statements from witnesses, and someone had already managed to take everything on the phone, distributing videos on social networks. Robert was handcuffed. Although he was released, he continued to shout threats, spit, and swear while they put him in the car. Then the ambulance arrived, and the paramedic cleaned and bandaged the cut on my cheek, while the guests left the restaurant one by one, talking softly, and I felt reality cover me more and more with each glance. I didn't know exactly how I felt at that moment. Relief? Anger? The void? But I knew one thing. They couldn't break me anymore. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unknown number. I knew who it was even before I answered. "Samantha." Mom's voice was low, almost pleading, so different from the night she'd been pleased to tell everyone that I'd finished as a waitress. "Please don't hang up." I was silent. "Listen." She paused as if gathering her thoughts. "Look at Robert. The police are pressing charges. He's facing trial. He could lose his job. You have to drop the charges." I closed my eyes. "No," I said simply and hung up. A few hours later, the attack began on social media. Mom's first post was long, steeped in drama and manipulation, portraying her as a poor victim, a mother suffering from a heartless daughter who took revenge on her by ruining Sarah's engagement. She wrote about how I humiliated them in front of friends, how I used my position for revenge, how I let my envy ruin an important day for their family. The comments under the post were divided. Some people, especially those who knew my family, sympathized with her, condemned me, and called me an ungrateful daughter. But others have seen the video. Others were in the restaurant. Others knew the truth. Sarah didn't stay away either. She posted a photo of her tear-stained face with the caption, "I just wanted a beautiful engagement. I don't understand why this is happening to me." Robert, as it turned out, had indeed lost his job. The video of him throwing a plate at me has gone viral. The employer did not want his company to be associated with the man accused of assault and terminated the contract with him. Mom never wrote to me again, but I knew it wasn't over yet. The comments under Mom and Sarah's posts were filled with sympathetic words from strangers, people who vowed never to visit our restaurants, fiercely defending a poor mother who survived the betrayal of her own daughter, and an unhappy sister whose wedding was ruined because of envy. But then Sarah moved on. She wrote a long, venomous post about a stepbrother psychotic who couldn't stand the happiness of others and did everything to ruin the most important day of her life, exposing their family in a worse light in front of hundreds of people. This post quickly spread to local community groups, hit public news sites, and was reposted by outraged users who didn't even know me or our family. When Jenny entered the office, I was sitting staring at my phone, flipping through the comments, reading the lies that were gaining popularity by the minute. "You know that we have all this on video, right?" she said calmly, coming closer. I slowly looked up at her. "The security system that Maria installed many years ago," Jenny continued, and there was something like satisfaction in her voice. "It automatically captures the sound and zooms in if it detects a raised voice or aggressive movements." I blinked, taking it all in. "You mean there is a recording?" And when I watched the video, I realized that everything was really visible. Crystal clear image. Every word. Every insult, every threat from Robert, every mocking phrase from Mom, every thud of a plate hitting the floor, Mrs. Henderson's screech, her face distorted with anger, Sarah's hysteria, the moment when Robert stepped towards me, clenching his fists, and the way he was intercepted by the guards. I didn't write any long explanations. I didn't try to justify myself. I just attached an entry in the comments to my mom's post with one phrase. That's what really happened. The video exploded. Thousands of people viewed it overnight, and in the morning, the number of views exceeded hundreds of thousands. Then other recordings began to appear. The guests from the engagement posted footage taken on their phones. Someone captured the perfect angle. Miguel politely tries to take the plate from Mrs. Henderson, and she, contorted with rage, throws it back, scattering sauce on the snow-white tablecloths. Another video showed Robert tearing off his handcuffs and shouting threats as he was put into a police car. One of our regular customers, the owner of a popular blog about the restaurant business, published an entire article about how customer behavior can destroy the reputation of an institution by attaching several camera recordings to it. And then something happened that no one expected. The video has become a viral meme. The pasta woman. Mrs. Henderson's face distorted by screeching, her trembling hands clutching a plate of lasagna, an explosion of anger, a hysterical cry of, "You can't do this!" All this spread across social networks, giving rise to hundreds of jokes, GIFs, and even T-shirts with her face, and the caption, "Careful, throws pasta." Cooking blogs picked up the story. Headlines appeared. "When a family dinner turns into a nightmare." An engagement that no one will forget. How the restaurant survived the visit of a toxic family. In the comments under these articles, people started sharing their stories about domestic violence, about parents who rejected them, about siblings who turned into strangers, and I realized that what happened to me was not uncommon. I'm not alone. And all these years, when I blamed myself, when I tried to figure out what I had done wrong, why my mother chose them instead of me, why I was not given a chance, all these years I did not see the simplest answer. It was never my fault. The consequences were not long in coming. Robert's company, already embarrassed by his arrest, could no longer ignore the video of him attacking his stepdaughter in her own restaurant. They didn't fire him, but he was demoted, and everyone knew that this was only the beginning of the end. Mom tried to control the damage by deleting her posts, but the internet does not forgive. Screenshots lived forever. When the video reached the owners of Sarah's wedding venue, they canceled the reservation, saying they did not want to be associated with the scandal. I imagined Sarah screaming with rage, my mother trying to call the new venues, and they were politely but firmly sent away. Mrs. Henderson has disappeared from the public field, but her screaming face remained on the internet forever. I was sitting in my office watching the camera views continue to grow, and suddenly I remembered something. That's what I've been telling myself for years. After my mom kicked me out, after I was alone, someday everything will change. Someday I will have a chance to make peace with my family. Someday they'll realize what they've done and try to fix it. But now I knew the truth. When I saw them that night in my restaurant, I saw how they didn't hesitate to try to humiliate me again. Despite all their successes, despite all these years, I finally realized some things can't be fixed. Some bridges are beyond repair, and that's okay. The video eventually helped the business. People began to trust us more, and we were supported by those who saw themselves in this story. But that's not why I kept it. I left it on my profile as a reminder that sometimes a happy ending is unforgiveness, not reconciliation. It's not a new chapter where everything is back together. It's just an understanding that you can leave and never look back again.